My identity quickly became one that was defined by crime. Nothing really actually propelled me towards change. It kind of culminated all at this one pivotal point when I was about 23 years old, where I got involved in something that I never thought I would be involved in. I'm like, if there's a God out there who could love me that much, I'll give my whole life to you. Hi, my name is Raymond.Mowla, and this is my story. I was brought up in a Muslim family. I've got an older brother and a younger sister, and I had a lot of questions about God and purpose from a really young age. I was looking out at life and seeing the beauty in creation, the complexity of it, just kind of being in awe of it, and knowing kind of inwardly that there has to be a God out there. And I guess because of being brought up in this Islamic background, I figured that if I'm going to get to know who this creator is, I'm going to get to know it through my Islamic heritage. So that kind of really inspired me to begin attending the mosque and learning Islamic tradition, and part of which was to learn Arabic. Through learning how to recite the surahs and praying daily and attending the mosque, I was growing in my understanding of how to practice Islam. But throughout that journey, I was often challenged that I don't feel or sense God's response to me, and it's not so much that he wasn't responding. It's that I guess in some ways he couldn't respond, because the Islamic way that I was taught was to recite prayers that were already pre-written. And so I'm not having a conversation, like a relationship with God. I'm just kind of doing these things to appease him, the things that I thought that would please him. And I continued to do that, but throughout my life, especially growing up in the household that I was growing up in, there was complications between my parents and their relationship, abuse even from my parents to not just me but my siblings, and all of these things gave me a sense of injustice, that if there is a God out there that cares about me, that is a protector, is someone who loves me, then why is he letting these things happen? And slowly, as these things continued to happen and be a part of my upbringing, and still trying to live out this devout religious practice, I was becoming more and more discouraged that this God can't actually be as good as people claim he is. Why does he let all these things happen? And it extended far beyond just my immediate family. I was looking at situations outside of my personal life, in the news that you would see happen, and in our community, and just things that I felt weren't right, weren't just, weren't fair. Losing, family members and friends at a young age, and just battling through as a young person, trying to understand and comprehend that in light of my worldview. I guess it got to the point that it was just so heavy on me that I couldn't reconcile a good God with this belief system that I was, and this religious practice that I was practicing, that I kind of made a decision that I was going to just abandon my belief altogether. But it's so funny, because I was maybe only 10 years old by the time I made this decision, but I remember it perfectly. I was kind of sitting at a window in my room and just kind of looking up at the vastness of the sky. And I guess maybe because I just equated something that grand with God. And I said to whoever, if there's someone out there, if you really exist, you're going to have to prove yourself to me, because I'm just done with this. I'm not serving you. I'm not praying these prayers. I'm not spending my time doing this anymore if you actually don't exist. From the time that I made the decision to kind of cast off God, I found something interesting happened in my life, and I kind of equated it with freedom. No longer was I constrained to be the moral person that I felt like religion was imposing on me. I didn't have to feel bad about not telling the truth. I didn't have to feel bad about stealing. And it wasn't an immediate thing. It was kind of this slow, gradual process of, I guess, encountering circumstances and situations throughout my life where I would pause for a second and I realized that maybe the only thing that was constraining me before was my religious belief. But if I kind of cast that off, then do I actually need to abide by that now? And when I found that, like, I worked out that answer to be no within myself, I realized, oh, I can go ahead, I can steal, I can lie. Like, this is exactly what I'm asking of God. If He's real, then do something about it. It was almost like I was trying to provoke God just to see if He was real, to see Him do anything to prove to me that He actually could stop me, that He was powerful enough to stop me, and that He cared enough to do it. This kind of manifested in small and petty crimes from a young age, because at the same time, like most kids in grade school, you're looking for acceptance in your social circles, and you're trying to etch out your identity. My identity quickly became one that was defined like by crime. I remember coming home one day, and our school bus used to stop off at a convenience store on the and then we'd walk into the street to go home. And a bunch of my friends decided to go in, and we were kind of playing a game with one another to see who could get out of the store with what without paying for it. And I remember I surprised everybody with the amount of stuff that I came out of the store with. And as friends, like, they're cheering me on. They were like, so happy and rejoicing, like we had all the ton of chocolate bars or something like that. And it just felt good. It felt good not only to be accepted, it felt good that I was good at something. And I guess for me, that meant a lot because of other things that were happening in my home life where I didn't feel like I had that acceptance, or I wasn't getting that encouragement. And so I started to build my identity around almost this criminal figure, this kind of menace to our neighborhood that would go out and do these kinds of things. I'd steal things, and I really didn't even care for half the stuff I was stealing. I'd mostly give it away to friends and stuff like that. But at some point that shifted when I realized I could make money off of the things I had stole. And so then stealing became kind of like an enterprise for me. I would steal and sell things to make money, and then usually use the money by the time I got to high school for purchasing alcohol and drugs. When I was about 16 years old, I remember I was working with my dad at the time. I had gotten suspended for something like a month of school. But this particular time, that when I was suspended, that I had to go spend time there at my dad's work, he got a phone call, and it was the police. They had found my fingerprints on a stereo that I was attempting to steal from a school. And when the cops had showed up, I took off and ran, but they had me on camera, and they wanted to have me come in to actually fingerprint me to see if the fingerprints matched. So they had a slam dunk kind of case against me. And I remember that was like one of the first times where my parents became aware that I was doing things that like just shocked them. Like, they found out that I'd been stealing from this high school, or from this school. And I mean, the way my parents dealt with this was the way they dealt with anything. Like, it wasn't a sit down conversation. They didn't even try to understand. They were just angry, and that usually quickly led to abuse. And so that's kind of the way that they dealt with it, and nothing was really resolved, either in my own life. I mean, it didn't change anything about the places where I looked for acceptance. It didn't change anything about the way that I felt I was going to continue to live, because of how I felt it added value to my life back then. And it just continued on its norm. But now I had experience with the police, and just going through that process, and then eventually going to court and all of that. And I remember it was like something like probation or community service I got for the charge overall. And I was kind of looking at the criminal justice system as kind of a joke. I wasn't recognizing the leniency that they had treated this offense with. I was more so looking at it like, oh, that's it? Like, community service? Like, that's nothing. And so nothing really actually propelled me towards change during this season of my life. I just continued on, and after, I always seemed to be able to stay out of trouble long enough to get off of probation, but the second I was off, if not far earlier, I was already back into planning the next thing I was going to do, and still associating with people who were applauding and cheering that on and going down that path. When I was 23 years old, I think that was when I came face to face with probably one of the more serious crimes that I've ever been involved with in my life. I was at a pretty dark place, because right through high school, I had pretty much drank and smoked my entire time away, to the point where I actually didn't finish high school. I was expelled over, like, what I considered to be a pretty ridiculous reason, although there was a lot of justifiable reasons why I should have been expelled a lot earlier. But when that happened, it just kind of fueled this anger that inside of me that I'd been carrying for quite some time by then, that nothing is actually fair in this life. Nothing seems to be purposeful or anything. Things just seem to happen, and people don't even care. And nothing was impactful enough that made me want to consider change. But in feeling that way about life, I mean, I spent a lot of the time, I think, looking back now, drinking and indulging in drugs, because I was actually kind of depressed about life. Like, I was just trying to shut it off. I just didn't want to think about it. It was kind of like an escape for me to not think about it. But that was also leading to a dark place too, because, little by little, I got angrier as I drank. I needed to rely on drinking more and more in order to continue to not only overcome the personal internal issues that I was struggling with, but all these other issues I was creating outwardly for myself by drinking. Losing relationships, losing jobs, losing friends. And it kind of culminated all at this one pivotal point when I was about 23 years old, where I got involved in something that I never thought I would be involved in. I was out at a bar one night with my sister and some friends, and an altercation happened, and it was, between my sister, her best friend, and her best friend's boyfriend. A guy was trying to pick up, I guess, her best friend that night, and the guy got involved, the boyfriend got involved, and that created kind of like a shouting match, and these guys were going back and forth. But my sister got involved to kind of break it up in the middle of it, and ended up getting struck by one of the guys during that altercation, and that just set me off. I had at this point been carrying a knife on me, which was pretty accustomed because of all the fights I'd been getting into. And to see my sister get struck, it was like I didn't even think about it. Like, it was something that was always close to my heart, that you don't touch the women in my family. Um, Growing up with watching my mom get abused by my dad, that like really instilled that sense of responsibility to the females in my home, that this should never happen. So I think it was triggering for me in a lot of ways, but it was also, fueled with, alcohol and a lot of bad decisions, carrying a knife. I actually pulled out that knife and ended up stabbing someone that evening 9 times in the chest. The guy who was trying to pick up my sister's friend. And when that all transpired, we were picked up later on that night because, fleeing from the scene, they recognized the car plates, and they were pretty much waiting at my friend's house, who I went back to his house, and just picked us up immediately. And it was kind of this whole convoluted thing that happened next, because they didn't quite know at that point who had done it, and none of us were talking. So it even got to the point where they let me out of the police station. Like, they took a statement from me, some made up nonsense that I told them, and got myself out of there. And they were actually going to charge the driver, thinking that he was possibly the guy who stabbed the gentleman, because he during the altercation he was waving a tire iron, and a lot of people visibly saw that. When he realized the seriousness of the charge that they were going to lay on him, because at this point the gentleman I'd stabbed was pronounced dead at the scene, and was, I think they said, placed inside a drug-induced coma to be kept alive while they were continuing to perform surgeries and stuff on him all night. He just lost it. He's like, well, I'm not taking that for anybody else. So he just gave up everything about what had happened. He even took them to where I threw the knife, and they retrieved it. They had a solid, like, everything they needed to put me away. And so later on that morning, they came and they picked me up. And when the police showed up at my door, I remember when they were explaining to my mom what had happened. And at this time now, my parents had already separated. The abuse between my dad to my mom had kind of escalated around my late teens, and so they had separated since then. I'd been living with my mom, my brother, and sister. And I just remember seeing the shock in her face. Like she almost couldn't believe that her son could do something like that. And I mean, there's far, if not equal, like just as worse things that I had been doing for quite some time, like involved in for quite some time, even up until that point. But things that I'm sure my mom was completely unaware of. So her recognition, her finally becoming aware of something as serious as this, and just seeing the expression in her face, I remember was kind of like a wake-up call for me. I remember sitting inside that holding cell when they took me into custody, and nothing else really impacted me as much as seeing her expression. But I was thinking about my own life too, like how could I get to a place where she saw me as someone different, to this place of a person that she sees as the person I am now at that point in my life. And I was looking over the steps, and I was just like, yeah, I could see like every step I took to get here. Like it makes sense that I would be exactly where I'm sitting today. But I didn't know how to change that. Like I was like, well, what's the alternative? Where else would I have gone? What else would I have done? Like, how could it not end up this way? And as weird as that sound, that actually gave me a lot of insight into how people end up in that place in their life, like what they think about themselves, how they feel about themselves, how they feel about life, how they feel about their placement in life and their purpose in life, and whether or not they even have one. And I didn't have an answer for any of these things. I just knew that they were, I was looking at the process of it all and understanding how I'm exactly where someone would end up who looked at life the way that I did. And I desired for change, but I didn't know how to get there. After a few weeks of sitting in the holding center at Maplehurst Correctional, my mom actually came and signed a surety to bail me out until my court hearing. And during that time, I was placed on house arrest. I was only allowed to attend college, which was kind of a miracle that I even had gotten into this college, because I was working at this company just before that, and I started off as a general laborer, but I had spent a lot of time working on computers just in my private life, and because of that, I was able to solve some issues in this company that allowed them to see that I had some understanding in IT and technology, and so they quickly kind of promoted me to an office IT manager position, and it came with a lot of privileges. I had access to a company vehicle. Just way more than I thought that I deserved or even was qualified for. Like, as much as I understood what I was doing, I kind of still figured, like, this is incredible. Like, nobody drops out of high school and goes and starts some work at a company and moves into a position so quickly that I've ever heard of. I was like, this is something like out of a movie. And sure enough, even inside that experience, I saw how my character would fail me, because I still had all the bad habits that I did. Drinking all the time, showing up to work late or not at all because of being hungover, and eventually I was called into that my manager's office, and he had to let me go. But I guess he saw within me the potential, but the lack of maturity, and so he wanted to do me a favor. And they had this thing at the time called Second Career that unemployment was offering. That would allow for you to go to school in a technical field if you could identify a technical field, and IT was considered one of those. So he signed off my termination paper as lack of training, and because of that, that allowed for me to go to school on a government dime to complete my certification to become a network specialist, which I did successfully. And this was actually really significant in why I was able to stay out on bail for upwards of a year, because the prosecution saw that I was absolutely going to end up serving time for this crime that I had committed, was a high school dropout, and if now sentencing was early and I didn't have the opportunity to finish college, I probably would be coming back to no support and no future. So he saw it as a positive thing to let me finish school, given that there was a very short date away for that to happen, and then they would proceed with sentencing and so forth. And so during this time, I was allowed to then begin to leave my house to go to school and return back home. But even then, I was kind of bending the rules and finding ways to still indulge with my friends and go out when I felt like. And I remember during this time, a lot of huge questions started coming back to me about what I would do with my life, because I was kind of wagering this opportunity I saw in, like I said, it was almost miraculous. Like, who gets, kicked out of high school, goes to work for a company, and the company starts recognizing your value all of a sudden and wanting to promote you? I was like, there's something crazy happening in my life. And even my friends were kind of saying, like, this is strange. And it began stirring inside me these thoughts of whether or not there is a God out there. Like, if there is this his doing? I'm kind of questioning. And I'm still carrying the weight of how I feel my mom had began looking at me, and not just her, like more and more people were finding out between my family and relatives and friends of the family about the crime. It was in our local newspaper, so even high school friends had found out about it. And people had differing opinions about how, whether they felt it was justified. There was a lot of people who would be like, yeah man, that was your sister you were defending, of course I would have done worse. And as much as I'm sure they were saying that to me to kind of encourage me, like, I was sitting with the reality of the outcome and the potential of having to go serve time, and even kind of coming back to a more reasonable clarity about thinking about the situation. And I'm like, well, it really didn't have to go that far. Like, outside of the knife, like, we could have gotten into a huge fight, still done a lot of damage, and not be in the predicament I'm in today, not have to be thinking about, oh, I've got to go spend years in jail. So I wasn't actually buying what they were saying. And then there was other friends and family and relatives who were just like, almost didn't know how to look at me anymore. Like, they were like, who is this guy? Like, we'd never imagine, like, when they heard my name associated with that crime, they're like, he did that? He's always, such a quiet boy, he's such a good boy, he's all these different things. So it's like, it was really a shock just to see how the impact and the implications of what I had done affected so many people around me. And that, I guess, it pushed me to want to understand again more about life. Maybe there was something to be understood that I wasn't seeing as clearly as I ought to have, and I was becoming open again to maybe returning to the mosque. But at this particular season in my life, that openness was really to anything. If a Buddhist monk came and sat with me, I would have welcomed it. If like, it didn't matter. But luckily, it was two cousins, like my cousin and his wife, who came and met with me during this time where I felt like, a lot of people were trying to distance themselves from me. And they had recently converted actually to Christianity. They had like this amazing experience they were talking about, and they kept talking about God in this very relational way, like almost like the way I had hoped to be able to connect with God when I was younger. And something inside of me just, wanted to hear more. So I decided to go and attend the church that they had invited me to. And I'm actually so thankful that they actually invited me to a Bible study on a Wednesday rather than a Sunday service. Because I feel like if I went in there on the Sunday and saw people worshiping and stuff like that, especially from my Islamic background and how I felt about who Jesus was at the time and stuff like that, there would have been a lot of things that were difficult for me to connect with. But when they invited me out to the Bible study, it just so happened that the pastor that day was starting right at the beginning. He was reading from the book of Genesis, and he started describing what happened in the fall. He started talking about the Garden of Eden in ways that I had never heard before, because in the Islamic paradigm, they don't believe in original sin. Like, oh yeah, Adam and Eve ate the fruit they were told not to, but God forgives because he's forgiving, and that was the end of that. There's no implication on humanity. Adam isn't separated from God through this act, and nothing is inherited to any of his descendants. But when I heard the pastor talking about sin in this way, that, oh, that separation from God that started with Adam, it is now, the reason why sin is in the world altogether. It's passed through to every generation since. All of a sudden, this actually kind of made sense of life. It was the first time I heard a worldview that made sense of the things I was experiencing. And I didn't even know I was carrying around a worldview up until that point that believed that everybody was perfect. So when the people did things less than perfect that I was let down by, rather than seeing that as, oh, well, that's exactly what I should expect from you because we're all imperfect, I was actually quite offended. It's the reason why I saw my parents as hypocrites. It's the reason why I saw myself as flawed, and part of my own personal struggle. and even the things that were happening around me that I called unjust. Like, I realized that it was from a perfection and idealistic paradigm that I was looking at life and expecting everything to be this one way. And now this pastor here is like just flipping my entire world upside down, teaching that, oh no, life is actually the opposite. I remember when I wrote my book, testimony about telling this, I said it this way. I was like, it's like picking up a newspaper and it's, filled with all these egregious things that happen in our community day to day. But reading it, and instead of being shocked by it, being like, yep, that's exactly what humanity, apart from God, separated from God, would be doing. And that's like the best way I could put it. It was finally coming into alignment with that. Mind you, I didn't understand who Jesus was. I didn't understand the necessity of what he did or what the gospel was at this point. But this pastor said something that was true, and true of something that was far-reaching for my worldview. So I welcomed it, and I was like, it made sense, and that's what I'd been looking for in my life, something that was true, something that applied so indivisibly to everybody that's how I'd be able to measure that it was true. And so I started attending this church for the Bible study only every single Wednesday, faithfully, right throughout the rest of my time I was on bail. And to tell you the truth, like, they probably did talk about Jesus, but I can't even say that I remember them talking about Jesus, but I'm sure they did. It was more so the other tidbits of information that I guess I could grasp at that time, that my heart would allow at that time, I was taking. Things like hearing that Abraham made mistakes throughout his calling with God, and yet God used him. Things like learning about Job and all the difficulties he faced, and even by people that were meaningfully trying to support him, and yet he endured, and God blessed him. And even the faults of Moses and people we considered prophets, like, even from my Islamic view, recognizing these names, and but hearing that the failure side of them, which was almost never talked about inside Islam, that these guys were actually human. They weren't above anything. They all stumbled and made mistakes just like we all do. I was like, if there's a God out there like that, like, that's the kind of God I guess I need. And so I felt quite encouraged, going to prison, and I got my hands on a Bible of my own and wanted to learn everything I could about this God. But I also had such a weird motivation too, because I had finished the Quran at a young age, and that in Islam is considered quite like an accolade to be able to do that. They tell you you're immeasurably blessed by God. So, I mean, people are trying to read it 2 and 3 times from beginning to end because they want that blessing. I guess I was treating the Bible in a similar way. Rather than sitting and trying to actually comprehend and understand the things I was reading and digest them and understand what it means in the reframing of my worldview and the way I see life, I was really just trying to get through it and be able to tell people, oh, now I finished that one too. And that's kind of a blinding disservice we can do to ourselves, because I can't actually recall even Jesus being in it, oddly enough. That's the expediency in which I was rushing through it just to be able to say I did it. When I came back, when I came back from serving my time, I felt quite, assured in myself again. Like, I had this time away. I was sentenced to 2 years plus a day, and I got paroled maybe after a year and a bit of that sentence. And I'd been separated from alcohol and drugs for that entire time away, and I was working out at the gym in the prison, and I was feeling quite healthy, thinking in a much better frame of reference, and just feeling better about myself in general. And I started to dream kind of again. I was like thinking about life and marriage and career and all the things that I think people in general kind of desire after, whether healthy or unhealthy in life. And I figured if God could be with me, because I had been seeing him too throughout the time I had been incarcerated, like in these weird little ways, but that made me wonder, is that you? Like, I remember my cellmate, he was like, I got placed with the guy who kind of runs the range as my cellmate. And because of that, they like, he checked me out, whatever. He's like, like to make sure I'm not, someone untrustworthy or whatever. In jail, they call it, a rat. And once he saw that I was kind of like on the level with him and stuff, and he's a Rexdale guy, and I grew up with lots of guys like that, he just started like kind of blessing me. Like anything he got, he was collecting doubles of just about everything in the prison, and he would always just share it with me. But now, for the first time in my life, I'm not looking at that as like, oh, something I scored. I was almost wondering, like, is this God's way of providing for me? Like, and I'm asking myself new questions about the good things I'm seeing happening in my life. Like, could that be God? Is that from him? Could he work through someone like my cellmate, even if he doesn't know him? Because that was part of even what they were teaching me in the Bible, where, God, God's people were the Israelites, but God used the Egyptians to go and chastise them when he wanted. It's like God is sovereign over everything. And that that exalted my view of God, to know that there's a God who's in control of everything, that he could use someone like my cellmate, whether or not my cellmate believed in him or not. I remember actually during our incarceration, he was teaching me about Christianity because I was kind of moving towards that way. But I taught him how to do the Salat prayers because he was moving towards Islam while he was incarcerated. So we were actually the perfect balance for what we were each looking for at that season in our life. But yeah, when I got out, I was quite confident that crime was behind me and that I had a much more positive outlook on life. And I didn't see my need to continue on with the church. Like I said, Jesus hadn't really meant anything up to me up until that point. It was just this, God out there, whoever he is, and he seems to be able to protect, and he seems to be able to provide to whoever he wants. So, I mean, I didn't really see my need for Jesus. And it would take me maybe about 5 years after I was released, in once again kind of like the same decline from when I was a child until to getting into major crime, that I was kind of on that same trajectory again of coming out feeling the best and just slowly, gradually getting back into alcoholism, partying, incurring tons of debt for myself, having to move back into my mom's house after having a place of my own, and just feeling like crap about life again and getting back to that same place of despair. And at this point now too, something had happened in my social circle where like I was quite offended by something that like a altercation that happened between me and someone, and I was actually thinking of retaliating in a way that would have landed me back in prison. And I remember just kind of contemplating this whole thing, like, if life really doesn't mean anything, like I was so excited about it just 5 years ago, and now I'm right back where I started, where I was before that whole thing happened. I'm like, it's like I'm always prone to going right back to the same place. And I was like, so life, it doesn't even matter. Like, I mean, if I go back to prison, at least now I know what that's all about. Like, it isn't terrible. Like, I could do it. And if that's all my life means, then I guess that's all it is. And as I was having this thought and I was planning this action against this guy I was going to retaliate against, I remember some of the things I had learned years before at the Bible study started coming back to my mind. The things specifically about original sin. And it piqued my curiosity because I was thinking, like, my cousin does, like, he seemed to actually authentically get off that path and stayed off that path. I was like, is there something about this faith that I'm not understanding? Something that's missing from my understanding, that I didn't get the whole picture, and I actually need something more in order to be able to live this out the way I see in his life. And because of that, it was I think the only thought that led me to really just abandon my plan and actually reach out to him years later and decide, like, and ask him, like, can I come back to church with you? Like, I think I want to check that out again. And of course, he welcomed me. They were attending a new church now, and I drove out to Scarborough to go visit them there. And when I attended, it was, everything. It was the first time I went. Everybody was welcoming and friendly. I don't remember any profound revelations that night or anything, but it was actually what happened uh, after I left that really began to change my life. When I left the church that night, I was so depraved inside my thinking that going to church and then going to get high didn't even seem like there was anything wrong with that. And this was a time when marijuana wasn't legal yet. I had a friend who had passed away a few years before, and it was his birthday November 1st, and it just so happened that the night I attended church was Halloween night. And because his birthday was November 1st, we had kind of like a memorial for him right at midnight for the past 3 years since he had passed away, where we would wait right until the clock struck 12 November 1st, and we'd light up this joint and just kind of play music that he enjoyed, and just have a moment of remembering him. Excuse me. And I remember that we had all this stuff ready. I went to go meet my friends, and right as the clock struck midnight, like, we pressed play to begin this music that we had prepared, and we lit those joints, and we were just kicking back in the car. And it was like, for me, I felt something tangibly change, like something I can't explain in words. It was like a light switch had turned on. And one of the first ways I started to recognize that what I felt was something that actually happened was through the music. Like, it was like the words all of a sudden stood up like Braille. They were telling, like, I was hearing them differently, but they were telling the story that was like the reality of my own life. One song came on and the message was about, someone who squandered their life away. And I'm listening to the lyrics, and I'm sure I've heard this song before, but I'm like, this song sounds like it's about me. Like, it was the first time I was hearing it through the light of thinking about myself as the person. And then this other song came on, and it was about a breakup, and I went through a breakup earlier that year that I'd been carrying with me and kind of still working through. And everything they talked about, how the breakup happened, it just felt like it was calling my card, like that was my story. And it wasn't really painting it in a great light or anything like that either. So I was feeling quite ashamed, and I was thinking to myself, like, if my friends who are in the car with me are hearing the lyrics of the song, they must know this is me. Like, the song is talking about me. And that made me feel quite ashamed, so much so that it became really uncomfortable. I wanted to get out of there. Excuse me. And so at some point, it was just too much to take, and I decided, hey guys, I'm going to get going. And it was my car, so I had to drive off. And after dropping a few people home and being kind of by myself, I remember turning off the radio, because, like, the stereo, because I just didn't want to hear any of these words anymore. And I pulled up at this light at Eglinton here, Ontario, and Mississauga, and I'm sitting there. It's like almost 2 a.m. now in the morning, and a cop pulls up behind me at the intersection. And mind you, I'd been driving without a license, without insurance. I'm high. There's marijuana in the car, which is illegal at the time. I'm sure there was like a ton of other things wrong with this situation. And I'm thinking to myself for the first time, if they just turn on the lights and pull me over, like, I'm going to go back to jail. And I've been driving so callously like this for all that year, and just acting like it's not a big deal. But for some reason this night, it's important to me once again. Like, it's almost like I was dead before, but for the first time in my life, my conscience is alive again, and it's like, can comprehend the results of the decisions I'm making. And I'm kind of slightly terrified too, because I don't want to go back to jail. I kind of had this job that was somewhat going well, and maybe the only decent thing in my life at the time, and I didn't want to lose that. So I was just like there's no way he's not going to pull me over. I'm driving this Acura Integra. It's souped up with a body kit, lights, all kinds of stuff. Like, I'm like, there's no way he's going to let a car like this go. And as I'm sitting there in that silence, I had turned off the stereo because I didn't want to hear the song lyrics anymore. In that silence, it was the first time I ever heard God speak. He said to me, just, I can't even describe it in my spirit or in the car. It was like I heard these words clear as day. They can come as close as they want to you, but unless I give the word, they cannot touch you. And I can't tell you how much I want to believe that this is God, but I had never heard of a God that speaks to people in this way. Like, at least even in those stories, that was a long time ago, and maybe he spoke back then like that. But I didn't even hear people from the church going around talking about him speaking to them in the way that I'm hearing him right now. So I was kind of like not willing to believe this. And the light turned green, and I pulled off from the intersection. And as I'm driving, right in the middle of the intersection, this cop just turns the adjacent way and starts driving down a side street, or down the main street. And I'm watching the whole thing because I'm sure he's going to pull me over. So I'm locked in on him on my rear view mirror. And I see the whole thing happen, and I'm just like, did I actually hear a voice? And mind you, I'd been smoking too, so like I thought maybe I'm high, or maybe, like I'm tripping out or something. And I started to doubt. And I went 2 more lights down the street just while still having these thoughts, like questioning, like, was that God? And all of a sudden a cop drives out of a different plaza and comes and sits behind me at that intersection at that red light again. And I'm like, oh man, like, is this because I'm doubting that God's like gonna give up on me? Like he just sent a cop again because I didn't believe? Because I remember having faith was a huge thing that my cousin often spoke about at that church. And I was like, am I being faithless? And as I'm sitting there in the car trying to work this out in my own mind, I hear the voice again. And he says the exact same thing that he said to me before. He says, they can come as close as they want to you, but unless I give the word, they cannot touch you. And I remember really wanting to believe, because I was like, you don't get off twice in one night. I was thinking maybe even the first cop called the second cop and told him, hey, don't let that guy get away, or something like that. And these words, like, they didn't even make sense to me, because if you think about it, like, God, who is in my paradigm supposed to be the most moral, the most like perfect good person, for some reason he's telling me that he controls this situation so much so that he's going to let me, like, he can control whether the cops who would be doing their job to pull a guy like me off the road, he could protect me from them. That almost seems like the complete opposite of what I thought about God all my life. Like, he protects a person who's doing the wrong, and that isn't what he's saying to me, but that's almost what I'm understanding about what he's saying. Like, what kind of God would say that? And I just can't comprehend it. Everything I've been taught about God, it's challenging, all these concepts, even the things I just believed that maybe I wasn't explicitly taught, but just believed in my own heart about him. I'm like, God doesn't move like that. And sure enough, as I hear him say the words, like, I want to believe it. I want to believe that there's a God that's good enough, good, like that good out there, that maybe he understands why I'm here. Maybe he knows something that the average person wouldn't know about me. And so he's merciful enough to consider that. And I remember pulling off from the lights, really wanting to believe that. And as soon as we pulled off from the lights, we weren't even driving like 3 seconds, and the sirens went off. And I remember when I saw those sirens, something came out of me that I wasn't even expecting. It's like I yelled out openly in the car. It's like, at this voice, like, this is just like you. And I guess what I was expressing, almost to tears, was how I had felt all my life about if there was a God out there. You're not here to protect me. Like, even telling me that you could, and now look, they're going to pull me over. Like, you have the power, you're saying, to change this situation, but you won't. You don't care. And as I verbalize this for the first time in my life, maybe, the cop wasn't even pulling me over. He drives around me and he takes off. I guess, I don't know, he called to something else, or God really is able to control the authorities. I didn't know what to make of it. But it just felt so emotionally exhausting, everything I'd been through, from the music to the shame to now this experience, and just how tired I was in life in general. I just remember saying, I don't know if this is you or not. I don't know who you are, but I just want to get home to my bed. And literally the next memory I have from that night is waking up the next morning. I can't even remember how I drove home. But I remember when I woke up, something strange happened that never happens. I woke up 5 minutes before my alarm clock went off. And as I was lying in bed there, I was now, sobered up from the high, I guess, and thinking clearly and recalling all the things that happened the night before and asking myself the question, did that really happen? Did the music really say what I thought it said? And I'm like, I gotta go listen to it again to see if I still hear it the same way, or was it just because I was high? And the thing with the cops, like, I know I'm not supposed to be driving my car, but that's how I get to work. Like, is God going to continue to protect me? Like, can I still take my car to work? Asking just the weirdest questions. And then the alarm clock radio finally does go off, and I have it set to a radio station. But it's like, because the night was Halloween the night before, this caller had called into the radio station, and she was telling the story that, she went out with her husband to a costume party where he was dressed up as Batman. And I guess at some point in the night, she runs up to Batman and kisses him on the mouth, and realizes afterwards that it's some other guy dressed up in a Batman outfit. It's not even her husband. And she's like feeling terrible because even though it was an innocent mistake, she still felt like, oh, she had to come clean and tell her husband what happened. And I remember as she was telling her story, this word just came and stuck in my mind. The word counterfeit. Believing that this person is one person, but they actually just look like them. They're not actually the real, authentic thing. And as I was listening to what would happen, like, were they going to call the husband? What were they going to do? They ended up hitting this novelty button, and I think it's from I Love Lucy or something, like a recording, and it says, "Get up, today you've got some explaining to do." And when I heard them press that button, I was like, oh crap, it's still happening. It felt like just like how the songs had been speaking the night before and stuff. Now the radio's speaking, but that's live. Like, how would he know what person is going to be on the radio and what story they'll be telling and who's going to call in? And that just reminded me, oh yeah, he's God. It's like he knows everything. And I jump out of bed because I'm slightly terrified, because if you think about some of the things that I had just experienced in the last 12 hours, it's like music that I had on a USB that I had planned. He knew what songs I was going to put on there and what songs I would play that night and what would speak to me. The cops, who are living agents in this life, like they live and breathe and move, he knew what intersection they were going to be at, and he knew how to move them. He's demonstrating sovereignty, and now through the radio, he knows what person's going to be there, what story's going to be told, and how he would use that. It was like everything just one after the other, but exalting my view of who God is. So when I jumped out of bed that morning, kind of wondering what's going to happen then if he knows everything about me. Because that means he knows not just the things I've been caught for, not just the things I've been prosecuted for, but everything, every finite thing that I've ever done in my life. And that thought terrified me. I remember in the very next moment, it was like the hardest thing to explain, but I actually felt the person of the Holy Spirit present inside my room. And it's so crazy because it's like, just imagine a person, like any person you know, invisible, except for somehow I know that this person is the God who's speaking through the radio, the one who's controlling the authorities, the very person who's been addressing me in all these different ways. He's right here and about like 10 feet away from me, and he's taking steps towards me. And as I just catch this glimpse of what is transpiring in this moment, I pretty much fall to my face on the ground, terrified, bawling my eyes out, really almost as a plea for mercy, because in everything I had been taught up until this point, you do good, you get good. You do bad, you get bad. So what do you think I expect he's showing up for? I haven't been living the best life ever up until this point. And so I'm really pleading for mercy. Like, maybe my card is up. Maybe this is how, when people pass away, like the experience they happen. I don't know what they experience. So I'm like, is this how it happens? Like, he comes for them? I don't know. Like, I'm just terrified, like, at what this might mean. And also, what does it mean on the other side too? Because like, for sure, growing up with an Islamic paradigm, there's a teaching about heaven and hell as well. And I'm like, is that real? Like, is he coming to take me there? Like, what does this mean? I'm just, and I had all kinds of, you know, wayward thoughts through, things my parents had told me about hell and what kind of people go there and stuff like that, and what God does to you there. That it was, probably in some far, memory in my mind, but it's still there, like in this moment, especially of having to be face to face with possibility that that could be the next stop. And so I'm just terrified at what's going to happen. And I remember sobbing uncontrollably, and I kind of lose sight of where he is in the room. I'm not even really concerned with that anymore, just really what's going to happen next. And when I finally kind of calmed down enough, I clearly hear the next words that the radio announcer, because the alarm clock's still going off, says. And she says, "Get up. Today we're going to teach you how to walk." And when I hear those words, I'm like, walk? I feel like these words are for me, but walk where? Where would God want me to go if this is God? And now I think I'm completely losing my marbles. When I was, I think, 17 years old, my older brother had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And one of the ways that it kind of came on was that he began hearing a voice speaking to him. But I mean, like, telling him almost the worst things in the world to do, not only to himself, but to others. And it got so bad that he got institutionalized. I was seriously considering, even in this moment, I'm like, have I lost my mind? Have I become like my brother? Is this like a thing in our family that I'm unaware of, or something like that? And all these, like, millions of thoughts like this going through my mind, trying to process what is happening in this moment. And I get up and I, somehow compose myself and get dressed and get ready for my day. And I know this time I hear him in my mind, like, because he brings these words that my cousin's wife used to say to me all the time, right back to my mind while I'm asking him about this bus ticket and whether I could take the car. He says, "Walk by faith, not by sight." And I know exactly not only who used to say that to me, but where she got it from. I knew these were words from the Bible. And that shocked me, because I was like, it's the God of the Bible who's talking to me. I got to get my hands on a Bible then. What else did he say? What else does he say? If he could speak through his word, like he's using this word that I know from that Christian church that is from the Bible, I'm like, what else did he say? So I ended up downloading this. I was looking for a Bible app while I got on the bus, and I'm reading everything I could get my hands on, but I didn't realize that it wasn't like a Bible app. It was a Bible quotes app. So there always just happened to be some quote at the time that was just perfect for every weird question I was asking God. And by the time I got to work that day, I found an actual online Bible and began reading that, and just started reading through the things that I thought I had read through when I was in prison. But now with this experience and a whole new paradigm to look at it, a whole new lens to see it through this experience of a God who is relational and real. I'm reading things that Jesus is saying. I'm reading things about what happened after Jesus' resurrection, and they're making sense to me in a whole new light. And not only that, it's helping me also to understand the gospel, like the significance of, if Jesus was the person who said these things, not Muhammad. He never talked about a Holy Spirit coming and him sending him, and he's going to remind you of things and all the things that are happening that I'm tangibly experiencing in my life. I'm like, then what else did Jesus do for us? And day by day, like as I'm studying the Bible, and I mean, I'm so hungry at this point in my life for it, and it's showing up and manifesting in such a real way that I'm spending 8 to 10 hours a day, like my whole work day, I'm not getting anything done, just reading the Bible, reading the commentary, reading the different translations of it, trying to read it in different, all kinds of different ways to understand it and just teach myself everything I can about this. And God is giving me insights too. Like if there's something I'm struggling to understand, he's taking some experience even from my criminal life and relating it and showing me how, oh, you see how you understood that thing? Oh, it's just exactly like this thing here. And just helping me little by little to understand it. And I remember especially for those first 9-10 days, every morning I woke up, it would happen again where I'd wake up 5 minutes before my alarm clock, had this amazing supernatural day with God, and experiencing him just showing up and answering my questions and things like that in ways that I never imagined possible in this life. And just wondering if it's still going to happen again. Like, is he still here this morning? Is he here again? Is he here again? Every morning, just because I can't believe it's true. I don't even know who to tell this to, because I feel like I'd sound like a lunatic, especially because I didn't have enough experience with knowing that this is how God had moved all throughout the last 2,000 years, and even before that with people that he had spoken to directly. And I was just blown away, and I was feeling an immeasurable sense of unworthiness, that still not getting why God could speak to someone like me, and just almost feeling like I have to relish all of it, because at any moment it's gonna go away. And I remember when I finally understood the gospel, about the 10th day of just studying the Bible relentlessly and trying to get this concept, like, why did Jesus die then? And understanding that that was actually what he had done for us, the entire reason why I was able to experience the very thing that I was experiencing right now, God's grace, his unmerited favor, was because of a mercy he can extend to me because of the punishment that Jesus paid. I'm like, if there's a God out there who could love me that much, I'll give my whole life to you. And I remember bowing down that morning. I actually woke up 5 minutes before the alarm clock went off, but I turned off the alarm clock before it actually went off, because it was the moment I think I stopped looking for the signs in order to believe that he was going to be there, and started to accept that there is a God out there who loves me that much, that he will be there. And that journey started about 12 years ago for me. Every November 1st, it's been kind of funny since that initial morning or midnight when he began speaking to me, that every year since, on that November 1st weekend since, God has always created an opportunity for me to share this testimony with someone, whether it be with a church or through a book or something, through a song even. Soon after all these experiences with God happened in my life, and I began seeing God as someone who I could walk with through life, that maybe had a purpose for my life that I was trying to understand for the first time ever, and even understanding something about life for the first time ever that I wanted to share with others, I was really excited to go and take this message to everyone I knew. And I guess a lot of people that I'm closely surrounded with who knew me all those years before maybe struggled the most to, accept this, because they had seen me a certain way throughout my life, and now I was kind of like internally somebody completely different, but outwardly looking exactly the same. So I recognize, how difficult it would be for them to accept what I was saying, and especially that it was coming from me. And I started praying and asking God, well, who can I share this with? And as I was reading through the scriptures, I saw, the disciples went everywhere, to strangers, to other countries, to, just anywhere where people were. And so I started doing that. And as I was going out and preaching week to week and having conversations with people about faith, and just, trying to share what had happened in my own life, I found that, people weren't as interested in stuff like that. They actually weren't asking some of the questions I had been asking throughout my life. And, sure, we'd have some good conversation, but it wasn't consistent. And there was kind of a disconnect for me, because as I was reading the scriptures, I saw Peter would go out, or Paul would go out, and they'd speak, and 3,000 people would come to faith that day. And for me, it wasn't about the numbers. It was just that it wasn't making sense. How come there aren't that many people interested in this, if there was back then? And so I started asking God. I was like, where can I go where people are actually interested to hear this message, of what you've done? And I remember he replied to me. He said, well, where were you in your life when you were the most open to hearing it? And that's when I remembered it was while I was on bail, when I was in prison, all of the lowest times in my life. And because of that, I decided, oh, you know what? Maybe I can go and connect with prisoners once again. And so I drove out to the prison and tried to find out how to become a volunteer and stuff like that. But I remember them mentioning that I'd have to have a criminal background check, and I knew I couldn't clear that. So I just looked around inside the waiting room of that institution I was at, and I saw there was tons of families there. There was tons of people there. So why can't I just talk to them? And that year, I just released a book testimony version of my story, and so I had that available, and I was giving it away for free, and just it was giving me a lot of gravitas. The people are like, oh, he actually went to prison, he knows what he's talking about. And I would just sit there and try to comfort the family, and understanding, what time is lockup, what kind of food inmates get, how many meals a day they get, how many times a week can you visit, and just answering questions for them. And they appreciated that so much that I became a recognizable figure every week in the visiting room, that they could come to me if they had questions. And sometimes it even turned into them saying, you know what, I think you'd be a better fit to go visit my son today, or my friend today, or whoever. So we ended up, me and a brother from my church, going and starting to visit inmates at the institution and stuff like that. And it was all going so amazingly well, until later that year, I just got this sense that God was saying stop. And I didn't want to believe that was from him. I almost thought it was the enemy, because I was like, God, why would God want this to stop? And while I was going week to week and still praying, God, was that you? He made it absolutely clear that it was him. And so I returned back to work, and we made the decision to stop. And my company had been moving around from time to time during the same time, and we ended up where our company ended up landing was inside the same vicinity where Prison Fellowship Canada, their head office, actually is. And when I found that out, I was like, this can't be a coincidence. And so I went over and I introduced myself, and I sat with them and shared my story. And little did I know that they actually had a position that had just become available there, and they were praying for the right person to fill it, and recognized that maybe that was me. And so they gave me a chance, and it's been 7 years, and I've been there ever since, and I'm now the National Program Manager for Prison Fellowship Canada.
Engage with the crew for the mission. Life is a paradox, make wise decisions. Hope that you understand the time box is ticking. Blink of an eye talks, watch for I'm missing. On a narrow path, but a lot of cats dissing. Stray us from the way, about to see what you're getting. While I flow for Christ who's inside of me. Born to be a prodigal, choose to be a prodigy. Shortlisted, unveiled gifteds. Reaching for a plateau high enough to get this and get lifted. Raised from the uttermost. Now my only boast is the praise of the Holy Ghost. Cause I'm owed no treasures for running wild. Death was my running tab, hell was my only prize. And these eyes get plucked for consuming lies. Cause my only reign came to end when he sent his child. Anatomical, straight to astronomical. My flow rocks round the globe like it's comical. There's a pride that will bring about the end of me, but another kind says I'm finally into me. And I see what the Lord meant to give to these servants who serve in the ring in community. A tough season, a lot of things are new to me, but I'm still the same OG, just a newer me.
Self-serving, catering to only